Hello, today is Friday, the 5th day of April 2019, and the weather forecast in Lagos is 34 degrees. Today's weather will turn out to be partly cloudy, but remember to stay hydrated always. I'm Tokunbo Taiwo, and this is Off the Press. With me this morning to discuss major headlines in today's dailies is Dr. Kubi Udofia, a legal practitioner. Welcome on the show, Dr. Udofia.
Thank you, Tokunbo.
All right, so how is it coming into work today, and what's your take on the weather? Too hot, too cold, or just right?
Well, like the rest of the week, it's been a bit humid, and thankfully it rained last night on the island.
Absolutely.
And yeah, there was a bit of traffic here, but yeah, we're used to the traffic in Lagos, so.
Okay, all right. Let's see. We've got a number of papers today for review. We've got The Punch, we've got The Nation, we've got Vanguard, we've got This Day, and later on as well will be, if we've got enough time, we'll look at Complete Sports. Okay, so let's kick things off by starting with The Punch. Okay, I'll just quickly take the headlines. The major headline on The Punch is Nigeria's debt hits 24.39 trillion naira and rises by 2.66 trillion naira in 1 year. That story is on page 27. And just underneath that major headline, there are lots of pictures regarding members of civil society protesting against the killing of innocent citizens by the Special Anti-Robbery Squad at the Nigeria Police Headquarters, the annexing of Alende. Okay, so lots of pictures there of a lot of the protesters concerning the killing. Kolade's killing recommends inspectors' dismissal. The full story is available on pages 4 and 5. At the top of The Punch, we've got, right at the topmost part of the Punch newspaper, we've got Fashola's Ministry, UDRP unit, budget full of errors. That's been said by the reps, page 9. And in the bottom right-hand corner of the Punch, suspected robbers kill Akure Anglican bursar and steal money. That story is available on page 5. We'll quickly look at the back, what's available on the back, before we come to the to discuss in detail one of those stories. So at the back page of the Punch, we've got homespun advice to governors-elect. So that's an article there. I don't know what on earth they're talking about. So if you want to find out what that is, grab a copy of The Punch. That's on the back page, homespun advice to governors-elect. Okay, let's flip over to the front page once again and then look in detail at the major headlines there. We're starting first off with Nigeria's debt hits 24.39 trillion naira and rises by 2.66 trillion naira in 1 year. Dr. Kubi, what's your initial reaction?
I'm not surprised. Okay. Not surprised in the sense that, I mean, there's been an increase in the level of debt since 2014 from, I think, then we had about 12.1 trillion.
Yes.
And, well, DMO, according to DMO, most of the debts have been used in financing projects and budget deficits, which, I mean, to an extent, you can't really blame the government for that. But there's need to make the debt level sustainable because, I mean, there's obviously going to be a payment day. So no matter how much you borrow, you have to also recognize the fact that someday you're going to pay. And yes, some months ago, the vice president actually elaborated the fact that our budget level is one of the lowest in the world. But that notwithstanding, I think there is need for the government to start looking at creative ways of funding our budget deficit and projects, maybe through concessions.
Do you not even think that there should be, you know, making ways to even curb the further increase of the of it all? Because like you said, it has increased over time, and more so in the past recent years, it has doubled. You know, so do you not think they should even try to curb it as opposed to even trying to pay, you know, what is due?
I think that would be a bit difficult because, I mean, if you look at our revenue profile, we depend majorly on oil, and oil prices are not going up. They are either stabilizing or going down. And with that, you need to borrow more to fund any deficit you have in the budget. So I think that has necessitated the borrowing over the years, the increase in the rate of borrowing. So I just think what the government needs to do is to diversify the economy and look for creative ways of funding projects and budget deficit. Like I said before, through concession, through private public-private partnerships.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. All right, because of time, we're going to leave that there for the Punch and move on to our next newspaper. We've got the next newspaper as The Nation. So I'll just go through the headlines once again. The major headline on The Nation is NJC advises Buhari to OK Tanko Mohammed for the CJN. And underneath that is a rider that says President weighs option on Onogen. Okay, so that's the major headline in there. Let's look at the top of The Nation. In the top left-hand corner, Defense Chief explains military's role in polls. That story is available on page 7. And just underneath that, also in the top left-hand corner, we've got gunmen kill Akure Anglican Church Bursa. That story is available on page 4. At the back of The Nation newspaper is an article, Brutes in Uniform, question mark there. An article by Shegun Agbade Gessin. That's available on the back page of The Nation. If you want to find out what that is, grab a copy of The Nation. Okay, so let's discuss the major story here, which is NJC advises Buhari to OK Tanko Mohammed for CJN. Once again, initial reaction.
My worry about this is the precedent we're setting. Okay. That someone can just go to court, get an ex parte order, and then you suspend the #1 judicial officer in the country, and then bring in someone to act or to be the chief judge in an active capacity, something not recognized in any law or our constitution. So that's my worry. And
you don't think the process is democratic enough?
I don't think it was. It wasn't democratic. It wasn't constitutional. What the president did, he has no backing under our laws. So I'm rather surprised that Mr. Justice Tanko Mohammed has been exculpated. Like I said yesterday, recommendations have not been made public officially, so we are still, at the within the realm of speculation. But I would rather be surprised if, he is confirmed and nothing is done, because it sets a very dangerous precedent.
You don't think by any chance that he will be the most suitable candidate?
It's not about suitability. It's about the circumstances in which he accepted to act as a CJN. If I can recall what he said during one of the conferences he went for, when he explained the circumstances, he said he was summoned to Aso Rock, and he didn't even know why he was being summoned. He was now presented with the ex parte order, and he had no choice but to accept being sworn in, and that's just disappointing. You expect him to know better, because the criteria or the procedure for appointing one into the office of the CJN is there. It's quite clear. He's been at the apex bench for a long time, and you expect him to know better.
Okay. Now there are a couple of questions that have been set on the front page of The Nation here, and they are actually questions for Buhari. But I wanted to pose those questions to you as well, to get your own take, your own personal take. Yes. There are lots of questions, but let me just go with one or two of them. They're saying, should the president accept NJC's soft landing decision to retire suspended CJN Onogen with full benefits? What do you say?
I think the president may have no choice, because the constitution actually empowers the NJC to recommend for retirement. So, but the circumstances, I think what we're looking at now is specifics. Yes, they've recommended for retirement. What about specifics? Should he be entitled to this? Should he sit in the Council of State? The Constitution does not make specific provisions as to that. So maybe that may be left for the president to exercise his discretion as regards the specifics.
But what do you think he should do if you were in his shoes? What would you do?
What would I do? It's difficult for me, because personally, I do not think that I'm not in support of Onogen being kicked out the way he has been kicked out. Yeah. Like I said before, it sets a dangerous precedent. But yet again, that's my personal opinion.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the final question on that is, should the law run its full course, including the conclusion of Onogen's trial by the Code of Conduct Tribunal and a fresh trial by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC?
I should think so. I think whatever the NJC have done, the matter of the CCT should be allowed to be continued to concluded, and then if EFCC decides to prosecute the CJN, they should be allowed to do so.
Okay, so final thoughts on this before we wrap up. What's your overall summary of this entire headline?
I think I'm just disappointed at the outcome of the NJC, their recommendations. That's if it's actually true. I said it's still within the realm of speculation.
So you're taking that with a pinch of salt?
Yeah, I'm taking that with a pinch of salt, but at the same time, I just think that, Tanko Mohammed, Mr. Justice Tanko Mohammed, he went there, accepted something he knew wasn't constitutionally or lawfully, he had no lawful backing to do that. So, he has some questions to answer, but then again, we're still within the realm of speculation, so we leave it at that. You
can correct me if I'm wrong, but from your talking about it, do you blame him for going?
I do blame him for going. He's a senior judicial officer.
So he should know better.
He was marched to Aso Rock. He told the press that he didn't know the reason they summoned him to Aso Rock, and only for him to get there, and they showed him an ex parte order, and he accepted to be sworn in. That's very
It doesn't speak well.
It doesn't speak well.
All right, thank you very much for that. We'll move on to our next story now. The next newspaper, which is Vanguard. Let's see what Vanguard is saying. The major headline right there is Nigeria's total debt now 24.4 trillion naira. We saw that earlier in one of the newspapers. Yes, that's said by the Debt Management Office. And just underneath that, a couple of riders. Federal government owing 19.234 trillion naira by end of 2018. Domestic debt is 68.18% of total, and new borrowings since 2015 in excess of 7 trillion naira. So those are riders underneath the major headline for the newspaper Vanguard. Let's look at the top of Vanguard here. In the top left-hand corner, we've got Unilag Honors Jim Ovia, Okunu, Olukoya, and others. The full story, the details for the full story are available on page 14. And next to that headline is court voids sale of Etisalat, which is on page 41. Next to that is CDS defense militarization of election on page 8. And in the top right-hand corner of the top of Vanguard, we've got Nigeria loses 400 billion naira on medical tourism annually. And that's by President Buhari. The full story is available on page 13. Okay, so let me see. Before we even talk about it, let me quickly look at the back. Oh, we've got sports at the back. Just one quick line. Chukweze's release clause set at 25.4 billion naira. Okay, let's go on to the major headlines once again. There's still a couple of stories at the bottom of the Vanguard, but I think from some of the stories that I've mentioned already, is there anyone in particular you want to touch on? Because I know we've talked about the DMO and the debt a little bit.
Yeah, the issue of the courts voiding the sale of Etisalat, quite an interesting one. I think it's appeared in most of the dailies today. And I'm not surprised at that, because before the sale proceeded and it was sold to Teleology, what happened was that on the 25th of April 2018, I think there was a court order restraining or asking parties to maintain status quo, that parties should not proceed with the transaction, with the sale. And I think there was a repeat of that order on the 10th of October 2018. But that notwithstanding, the NCC, the CBN, and the other parties, they went ahead with the sale, and the sale has now been concluded. But what do we have now? The court has now voided all transactions and everything that took place after the court order was given on April 25th, 2018. And I think it's just a lesson for our investors, both foreign and local, that, look, our laws are supreme. The rule of law must be adhered to in whatever transaction you do. I know some people may opine that, it sends wrong signals to the
potential investors.
Exactly.
Or to the international investor market.
International investors that, you could just go through transactions and one day the court will wake up to give orders like this. But this did not just happen suddenly. 2 orders were given. I'm sure the investors were aware. Their lawyers were in court and they knew about, and the court verified that the lawyers were served with the orders, but they went ahead to carry on the transaction. So
which is negligence on the part of the corporate lawyer?
Yes, it is, because the court went round, the court actually verified that they were served with the orders. They knew about the orders. 2 orders were given and they went on with the transaction. So they have themselves to blame.
Exactly. All right. Is there any other story that you want to touch on before we move on? So we've got Unilag Honors Jim Ovia and those CDS defense.
the CDS defending the militarization of the election. I think it's just an image laundering thing, because we all saw the videos, the pictures. There was nothing wrong. Maybe the intention to send the army, out there to man some locations during the elections, the intention was good. But what happened afterwards was, an eyesore. We've seen the videos, we've seen the pictures of, armies, forming unusual alliance with Turks, standing by, or even engaging themselves in voter intimidation, assisting Turks in ballot box snatching and all that. So this is mere trying to defend the indefensible. I mean, they should also be apologizing for some of the things they did during the elections.
Okay, very well said, Dr. Kubi. Thank you very much for that. So let's move on to our next newspaper now. We've got This Day. Okay, there's a number of stories. We'll start at the very top of This Day newspapers. CBN banks to disperse 200 billion naira single-digit loans to creative industry and others. The full story is available on page 6. And then just at the bottom of the headline there, we've got struggle for Senate presidency intensifies. Lawan meets APC governors, and a couple of riders underneath that story. Goje in talks with Ndume. Gaya declares for Deputy Senate President. More of that story available on page 6. And the major headline on This Day is Nigeria's public debt grows by 12.25%, hits 24.387 trillion naira. The rider underneath that is investments in Sukuk green bond will boost financial inclusion, explains the Debt Management Office. Okay, so that's a recurring story on almost all of the major headlines. It's like one of the biggest stories this morning. Nigeria's public debt growing by 12.25%. Okay, so I don't know if you still have one or two things to say about it, or you would rather talk about something else that we've seen on this this newspaper headline.
Yeah, I think we could touch other stories like the news at the top there. CBN banks disbursed 200 billion. Single-digit loans to the creative industry, and say others. I mean, looking at others like farmers who are engaged in cash crop production like cocoa and all that. I mean, it's quite good, and I think the intention there is it's part of government's effort to diversify our revenue profile, to look away from oil. And the creative industry, I mean, they've done well for themselves so far. People in the creative industry, for the past years, they've been self-funded. And it's good now that government is looking that way. And it's going to be single-digit loan for a term of 10 years, which is quite commendable. And I hope it works. I mean, it'd be good in terms of diversifying the economy and reducing our focus on crude oil.
Yeah. On the whole, it's a positive step, you think?
It is. Absolutely, it is. And then we just hope that the loans would actually go to the
where
exactly people who really need the loan in the creative industry, and then our farmers out there.
Are you saying that you think there might be some kind of politics involved in?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I'm just saying that, I mean, they need to get the procedure right.
Okay.
The intention is good, but hopefully the procedure, they will get it right. And
and if they will be able to implement, to the letter.
Yes, I think they will, because it's almost like, if you look at it, it's CBN in partnership with the Bankers Committee. So the bankers are involved. So it's almost like a public-private partnership. The money is coming from the banks and then backed by government, which is...
Okay.
Yeah,
all right, there's this story that I thought maybe we should touch on before we move on. It's on the Ethiopian Airlines. Pilots of crashed aircraft followed recommended procedure, which is on page 8. We've been hearing the story of the Ethiopian Airlines since the crash and everything. So I don't know if you have one or two things to say about that story now that you've said, they followed the recommended procedure. Yeah,
I think what we're having now is a series of investigation. They're following procedures to ensure that, like now they've cleared the pilots, that they follow the procedure. So I think now the burden goes back to the manufacturers of the aircraft, which many people have pointed towards, whether there were some technical errors in terms of the crafting and manufacturing of the aircraft. Okay. Because there could have been insinuations that maybe the pilot didn't follow the right procedure and all that. But now they've been cleared that they followed the right procedure. The fault wasn't from the pilots. So now the attention goes back to the manufacturers of the aircraft.
Do you think this is some kind of blame game that is going on, passing the buck, hit left, right?
No, I don't think so. I think they're following. I think they're following procedure. Procedure, yeah. Okay. Just to ensure that all areas are covered. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. All right. So at the back of This Day, we've got an article restructuring post 2019 election. Let me ask you your thoughts on this. Restructuring generally post 2019 election.
I think it's necessary because right now we're already looking at 2023, and different geopolitical zones are claiming that it's their turn. And so I mean, the elections, we saw how the voting pattern was. It was basically, you know, based on maybe people voting for their own. So there's need to restructure the country to ensure that...
sorry to cut in. Yeah. When you say restructuring, are you talking about in terms of the rotational, should it be rotational presidency? Or?
Part of it. That's part of the problem, to give every single Nigerian a sense of belonging. I know democracy is about a majority, you know, majority carries the day, but it's important that every Nigerian, every tribe, especially the major tribes, should be given that sense of belonging. So we need to start now to prepare rather than wait for 2023, and then we have the same debate that has been going on since 2015.
A perfect way to end your analysis right there. Thank you very much indeed. We've been speaking to Dr. Kubi Udofia, a legal practitioner who has given us fantastic analysis on the major news headlines. We're going to take a quick break right now. When we return, we'll be talking sports with Udoka. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Off the Press right here on PlusTVAfrica. We're moving on now doing our review, and we're talking sports. We've got Complete Sports next, and the major headlines on Complete Sports, we've got in the right-hand side at the top there, Saints weary of Mane return. Yes. That's the headline on the right-hand side of Complete Sports. And just at the bottom of Complete Sports, the middle towards the bottom, we've got Eagles rise to best FIFA ranking in 18 months. Now 42nd in the world and 3rd in Africa. Okay, and then next to that, we've got also in the right-hand corner, we've got Hazard. Spurs will stay in Chelsea's shadow. Let's quickly look at the back before we talk about any of the stories. We've got United on the back of Complete Sports. United to take De Gea risk. Yes, that's the major story at the back, but there are lots and lots of other stories available on the back page of Complete Sports. If you want to find out what those stories are, do grab a copy of Complete Sports. Joining me here in the studio to discuss these stories, the sports stories, is our in-house sports analyst, Udoka Njoko. Welcome.
Good morning, Tokunbo.
Good morning. Okay, so let's start with the front page. You know, what story is actually jumping out to you and why?
Well, starting from the local scene, it has to be for the Super Eagles of Nigeria rising to their best FIFA ranking in 18 months. Looking at the AFCON qualifiers so far, we've qualified for the AFCON 2019 tournament. And also from the friendly matches that we've played, the recent one was against Egypt, where we won that game by 1-0. These games actually tell on how the FIFA ranking is being produced. And remember, on the world scene, Belgium still ranks #1. We also have the likes of Brazil and England in the top 5. But for Africa, Nigeria still in the 3rd position. I'm sure that if they perform well in the AFCON 2019 tournament, they just might rise up to #1 in Africa. But it's been a long time we saw Nigeria in this position in Africa and, of course, on the world, for the 2nd in the world. So it depends on how good they play their football matches, from friendly matches to major tournaments. If they get to perform well, it does well in their rankings, talking about the FIFA rankings.
What's your take in terms of the rankings worldwide? You know, do you think they can do better, or they're doing well at the moment?
Yeah, what we have with the Super Eagles squad, for Geno Rod, the head coach of the team, he is actually putting in the best he can for the Super Eagles of Nigeria. Like I said earlier, if they perform well, which I know they will because of the kind of players that we have and our quality of football in this part of Africa, I believe that they would surely rise up in the FIFA ranking. And in the World Cup, the Russia 2018 World Cup, we saw how Nigeria performed in that one. Though we crashed out from the group stage, we still gave a good account of ourselves. So I think Nigeria, the Super Eagles of Nigeria, are getting back to the best of forms when it comes to playing football. All
right, let's touch on the Hazard story before we round up this morning. What's your initial reaction?
Well, for Eden Hazard, well, there are rumors that he might be leaving Chelsea for Real Madrid this season, but presently he's still a Chelsea player, and he said Spurs will stay in Chelsea's shadow. And truly, from how the Tottenham Hotspur team have performed so far, season in, season out, they get to play like they are going to finish in the top 2 or top 3 in the EPL, or act like they will win the title, but at the end of the season they get to fall apart. Now Chelsea are on 3rd position, Tottenham on 4th, Arsenal still in the battle for the top 4 position in this one. And looking at the table, it's looking likely that Chelsea will finish ahead of Tottenham Hotspur. But Tottenham Hotspur, they've moved to their stadium, that's the White Hart Lane, refurbished White Hart Lane. They are willing to win the remainder of the games for the rest of the season. And Arsenal also in top contention for that one. But for Chelsea and Tottenham, I do not think they're in the same category. In as much as they are playing the best of football, Chelsea just might finish ahead of Spurs this season.
Okay, let's just touch on one more story before we wrap up. Saints weary of Mane return.
Yes, there's a game in the EPL today, Southampton against Liverpool, and Southampton used to have Mane as their top man when he was at the club before he moved over to Liverpool. So Mane is going back home, and he's a very, very dangerous forward playing for Liverpool. So it's looking likely that they just might fall apart. Talking about Southampton at home, Liverpool need to win this game to remain in contention to win the EPL title this season.
Okay, and that's how we're going to wrap up on Off the Press. You've been listening to Udoka Onjoku, our sports in-house analyst, and that's how we're wrapping up right here, right now on Off the Press. We're back on Monday next week, same time at 8:30 precisely for another edition of Off the Press. I'm Tokunbo Taiwo saying have a great weekend.